welcome back to the Pat Flynn Show. Sorry for the start to the stream here. We're just having a few minor technical difficulties, but we have Dr. Jim joining us, and also the regular, of course, the co-host at this point,
as it were, yeah,
and a
friend of the show,
indeed, and returning guest, Dr. Casey Edler. We're just gonna jam around, but I think we're probably gonna continue the conversations that we had previously related to epistemology, but as we were testing things behind the scenes and trying to get our system straight, we happened to be talking about some of our favorites or least favorite philosophically themed movies, whether they intended to be or not. So why don't we just use that as an icebreaker? I think that's just kind of a fun thing to start talking about. And we were talking about M. Night Shyamalan movies. But I'd be curious just for both of you, if you had to pick like a number one. For you, Jim, is it Big Lebowski or?
Like film for philosophical content?
Right. Mm-hmm.
I mean, it's going to be probably Malick's Knight of Cups or Malick's Thin Red Line. Yeah.
So give us some justification if you don't mind.
I mean, so oh gosh, just if you look at Thin Red Line, it's a phenomenology of hope before death, right? And it is about the irreducibly different perspectives of the eyes of faith and sort of the eyes of doubt on reality, right? And Thin Red Line is a film for me. I mean, I saw it in the theater in, what was it, the summer of '98 when it came out, when everybody thought it was going to be like Saving Private Ryan, Pacific Theater. And I remember a buddy of mine and I were the only ones who sat through the whole film. Like everyone else walked out, right? Okay. And that film,
because they probably thought it was going to be like Saving Private Ryan Part 2, right? Yeah.
It was going to be Saving Private Ryan, Pacific Theater. That's how like they build the film, right? Mm-hmm. And that film changed my outlook on things. Like that film began a process of kind of reversion for me. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, definitely. And I probably watched that film like once a year. Right.
Wow. Okay. So I've never seen it, but now that's got to go. I gotta get that done. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And so I could pick almost any of the Malick films. Yeah. But Thin Red Line is probably the one that's been most abiding for me. New World from Malick too that's a very important film to me. So, and man, we could do a deep dive on like the Heideggerian. People miss I know a lot of like Catholics want to make Catholic films of these things, and fair enough. But like you have to remember, like Malick was a trained phenomenologist. Like he was studying under Herbert Dreyfus at MIT. He was a Heidegger guy, and those themes, you have to understand those themes, understand those films, right? I think that's important. And it's also important, though, I think with Malick's films too. If he wanted to write philosophical essays, he could have been, one of the leaders of his generation in doing that, but he didn't. He left and made film. So what he's trying to do is clearly something he thought he couldn't do in academic philosophy. So I think we have to be careful not to turn the films into treatises, because they're not. Yeah.
Right. Interesting. Yeah. Irish says he thinks I'm on the webcam. Like, do I sound like a pile of junk right now, guys? Or is it...
No, I don't. Yeah.
Okay, so, sorry. We've been having technical difficulties, so I don't know if they're continuing or not, but hopefully you guys can hear me okay. But Casey, how about you? Favorite?
Okay. How can you hear me since I was the one with the issue before? Am I okay now?
You sound all right to me. So
yeah,
right.
We're just gonna go with it. Yeah. If we just have a trash document here for this episode, then so be it. Yeah.
Fair enough. Did you see A Hidden Life by Malick from a couple?
Oh yeah, definitely. Yeah, brilliant. And that to me is the best Malick starter film. I think the themes are most overt. It's the most like watching a normal film that you're going to get from him. Yeah.
Yeah, which it's like a 3-hour, very slow moving depiction of rural life in Austria in about 1940. But it is still the best Malick entrance film, I guess.
Yeah.
I thought that was an amazing movie. I do have like this list in my head of like the 4 best philosophical movies. Let's see if I can remember them. No, let's say 3. One is just My Dinner with Andre. It's just two characters having a conversation in a restaurant, and they mention Heidegger explicitly, and so I got to give it a nod for that. And then a movie called 9 Lives, which is 9 separate about 10-minute short films. Each one is one shot, is a sustained long shot. Usually just dialogue between characters, a lot of unspoken between the characters that we're kind of catching on to and stuff like that. But it's not a very well-known film, is why I mention it. And then I don't know, I always thought the movie by Mike Leigh called Naked.
Yes.
that is a trip as well. So those are some that I find people don't know as much. Pretty philosophical.
My wife and I watched a film just a few months ago called "I'm Thinking of Ending Things." Which, I mean, by the way, if you're not like up to date on your meds, don't watch this film, right? Okay, right? Okay.
I am.
Yeah, okay. You know what I mean? Like, it's like you might need to consult the psychological professional before watching this film. It's not an easy film, right? But man, if you want to get into something that really, really wants to unpack the layers of personality, right? It's absolutely brilliant. Like, it's unclear how many characters are in the film, right? I mean, and at no point, if you're really watching, will it be clear to you how many characters are in the film? And that's part of the point. And after watching that film, I had like about 2 weeks where I was like, well, who the hell am I anyway? Right. And so, yeah. So once again, if you're otherwise healthy, enjoy the film.
Good film.
Yeah. Yeah.
The DVD comes with a scheduled appointment for your psychiatrist.
Exactly. Yeah.
That's good. That's good. Have you guys seen the movie? I think it's kind of a lesser known independent film, Spring, Summer, Fall, Winter, and Spring.
Yeah, very Buddhist, right?
It is. It's definitely, in the I would say it's just it's a Buddhist film straight up. But that is one of my favorite movies.
Yeah.
And also pretty haunting and depressing. Like it does not end on a sweet note by any means, but it is a fantastic film.
Are you guys familiar with Errol Morris, a documentary filmmaker?
Yes, I've seen a few quirky films at some point.
I love Errol Morris, and I actually use Fast, Cheap, and Out of Control in my philosophical psychology class.
Okay.
Right? Which is, I think, one of the great like film studies of kind of the recalcitrance of understanding human-mindedness, right? That I've ever seen. Yeah, so I really recommend Errol Morris's Fast, Cheap, and Out of Control.
Yeah, very cool.
Real quick, my last comment on that, I assisted a philosophy and film class when I was just getting started in grad school. And the films he picked for that were Streetcar Named Desire, which is in New Orleans. That's where we started. Yeah. And then The Conformist by Bernardo Bertolucci, which has a main character who's a philosophy professor. That's an interesting movie. Yeah. And The Passenger, which stars Jack Nicholson in like his most sort of probably thoughtful sort of role. It's interesting. And then Paris, Texas was the one we ended it with. And he ended with that one because they're driving out of Houston sort of on I-10 East, which heads back to New Orleans. So he had this loop. But
I actually want I have a draft, I'm not ready to share yet, but of a paper on Apocalypse Now. And the sequence in Apocalypse Now with Colonel Kilgore, right, I think is one of the most incisive understandings and criticisms of Nietzsche that has ever been penned, or so to speak, right? Yeah. So I think Apocalypse Now is a film that has not been unpacked properly for its like philosophical content, But one thing you mentioned was some films that sort of explicitly like they mention philosophers' names, something like that, and that's fine, has a place, but I kind of see that as like dick jokes and stand-up comedy, right? It's sort of
just cheap. Yeah,
it's too easy. It's too, you know what I mean? It's sort of like going back. I kind of appreciate that Malick never has somebody like holding up Bean in Time, whether
sure.
like making
smart people. I'm red. Yeah. Uh-huh.
Yeah, I'm red, and moreover, it's like I'm going to tell you what's going on here now. And once again, if you want to write a philosophical treatise, by all means do that. But like, let's save that for like low talent schmucks like me, and like artists should not be constrained by that in a way. Yeah. You know what I mean? So I tend to like stray away from films that like are that explicit about it, because I
just wear it on their sleeve. Yeah. Uh-huh.
Yeah, because once again, I think that kind of misses the point that we're making a piece of art here, right? Not writing an essay, right? I'm not saying those films don't have a place though either, right? Yeah.
Yeah, good stuff. Well, hey, fun way to lead in. I guess we might as well just take a hard turn now because I can't think of a natural segue.
Yeah.
So, Jim, you missed our last conversation, but Casey and I were just had a great chat on epistemology and poetic knowledge. So, Casey, why don't I kick it over to you, because maybe you could give us a summary of what we talked about last time and where you want to drive the conversation this time now that Jim has joined us.
Yeah, and Jim, so having listened to some recent episodes, correct me if I'm wrong, you have a book that's yet to come out?
Yeah, sort of in process, yeah.
Okay, I think from what I gathered from hints you dropped, that some of what I'm going to get into will overlap with some things you talked about, like Pittsburgh school stuff, which I'm not as well versed in. So I'm interested to see how these two schools sort of go together or don't, and that sort of thing. So your point about Malik, Malik making art rather than writing essays for journals, I mean, that's poetic knowledge in a nutshell.
Yeah.
He went the poetic route rather than, if you will, the scientific route. So, I mean, there's this book. Here it is, Poetic Knowledge, The Recovery of Education by James Taylor. And this is sort of the philosophical charter of what was behind the Integrated Humanities program at the University of Kansas, which you might be familiar with.
Yeah.
And John Senior is another figure here who was the most famous educator and teacher of that program.
I sit less than an hour's drive from KU right now. So,
yeah, one of the lucky few.
That's right.
So there's this book, John Senior and the Restoration of Realism, which is his biography and gets into the philosophy behind the program, which left a mark on a lot of people. So anyway, I'll talk mostly about Taylor's book. Just a quick recap, Pat, since we talked about this before. But
take your time.
The book tries to say that we need to draw a distinction between poetic knowledge and scientific knowledge. Or you could have a poetic approach to a topic or activity, or a scientific approach. You also, and this will be a big deal that I hope we can get into, you could have a poetic culture or a scientific culture.
Yeah.
And so really simply, poetic knowledge, I love this story from Charles Dickens' Hard Times, where the professor, Gradgrind, asked the students, who knows what a horse is? And he calls on one girl whose dad trains horses, and she's had a lot of contact growing up with horses, but she can't spit out a definition on the spot.
Yeah.
He concludes she doesn't know at all what horses are. He calls on Johnny, who's never met a horse in his life, but he's got the dictionary definition memorized. He spits it out, and he's like, that is what a horse is. Now we all know. And he's got this monologue about facts. I want children.
The form is impressed in his intellect, right? Yeah.
Right. I want children to know facts. That is what they need to be reared up in, facts with a capital F.
Yeah.
So it's sort of like, I've been watching some episodes recently. I did not really watch Jeopardy much until this guest hosting thing started recently. I've not watched a few episodes of that. And that's the pinnacle of like trivia knowledge, right?
Yeah.
And you know a lot. We think whoever's winning Jeopardy, they know a lot because they can answer these trivia questions.
Right.
So poetic knowledge, I mean, we can give, more examples of it, but it's going to be direct knowledge of a thing acquired from encountering it in experience. It's more of almost like a little bit of a sloppy, unpredictable sort of dwelling with the thing over time, rather than subjecting the thing to a method that we've developed in advance that we're applying in this specific case, sort of subjecting the things to our scrutiny, often because we want to use it for some further end that we have in mind. So that's the distinction.
Can I give you an example?
Go ahead.
So this is from here's a good film. This is an explicitly philosophical film, right? So this is maybe like a dick joke, but there's a documentary free on YouTube, Being in the World, which is it's sort of it's Herbert Dreyfus's students all got together with this director and made a documentary about his work. Okay, so it's a little kind of like just drippy, like worship of Herbert Dreyfus. We might debate whether that's worthy, but anyway. But there's an example in there that they use of, a scientist, like a hydrologist who studies fluids, like a fluid dynamics person, and a speedboat driver. And the point is there's things about water that the fluid dynamics engineer knows that the speedboat driver doesn't. But there's also things about water that a speedboat driver knows that the scientist doesn't, right? That there is a contour of reality that the speedboat driver is discovering and knows in this practical encounter with water, right? That is unknown to the scientific method, right? And what a scientific culture does is it privileges the one over the other, right? This is the real knowing as opposed to this other kind of knowing, right? And that's why I have a sympathy to a sort of epistemology. There's as many things to know as there are ways of working with reality.
Yeah.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
They're all knowing. They're all quote unquote objective in that sense, right? So there might be, there might be speedboat driver knowing that is, unknowable to someone who's never done it. Not might be. I think there is, right? So yeah, I agree with that. I think a lot of what I'm trying to do is to carve out a space for poetic knowing. Yeah.
Yeah. This ties in with the conversation I just had. I don't know if you heard it, Casey, with Brian Kemple just a couple of days ago. We were harping on how knowledge is itself analogical, just as being comes in many ways, so does knowledge, right? So I think that's kind of a theme. It's seeing itself repeated on the Pat Flynn show this week, which is good because it's an important theme. Mm-hmm.
Well, I have found this theme repeated so many times now that I know about it. And I at some point, Pat, I've sent you a document. Maybe it's up on one of our other podcasts or something, where readings from Plato, Aristotle, Augustine, Aquinas, Henry David Thoreau, Cardinal Newman, Henri Bergson, Jacques Maritain. I mean, just everywhere I look, and nobody's using the same exact word for it in each case. Connatural knowledge.
Yeah,
that's Maritain.
Yeah. Look, I'm going to throw in there Merleau-Ponty. I'm going to throw in there Heidegger. Right. Mm-hmm. That whole tradition too. Yeah. Yep.
Yeah. So that's what I was suspecting, Jim, was that you're kind of I've done a bit with phenomenology and continental philosophy in general, but I feel like it's a little bit of a different arena, and I suspect there's a lot of overlap in what the concern is here.
I mean, I think in a lot of ways, and Pat and I just had a great conversation with a phenomenologist on this. And the way I would kind of define that outlook is, it is a defense of this notion that there is a life world that's defined by these poetic ways of knowing, right? It's a defense of that against scientism, right? It's to say that science only makes sense when embedded in these poetic ways of approaching the world, right? And the idea that we're going to somehow get a final scientific description of things that leaves all of that out is a chimera, right? And I think we have to be careful with that word poetic here too, because when we hear that as contemporary Westerners, we're thinking, it has to rhyme, right? It's poetry, right? But I mean, the Greek poesis is making, right? Okay, it's like they would put any kind of making under a poesis. So craftsmanship is a poesis, right? And even certain kinds of scientific knowledge go into a poesis because you're making the concept, you're taking the matter and you're going to work it up into a concept, right? Mm-hmm. And so what we mean by poesis here is basically that there's first and foremost a practical, meaningful, existentially significant encounter with the world, right, that reveals to us a real world, and it's only with the backdrop of that we can go and become scientific, right?
Nice, excellent. Yeah.
You're hitting it all. So that reminds me of somebody I think it's great to look up if anybody's interested in this, is Matthew Crawford, and he's got all these lectures. A book called Shop Class as Soulcraft. And
I would go. The book is The World Outside Your Head. That I think is the masterpiece from that guy. Yeah, definitely. Okay. And because there he really takes this up root and branch there. Yeah. So Shopcraft Soulcraft is excellent too, but the one that I really push people is World Outside Your Head. Yeah. Yeah. I want to be Crawford when I grow up. I think he's really cool guy. I think what motorcycle repair is for Crawford is what jiu-jitsu is for me. Right. So he was this kind of disaffected middle-aged academic who found himself doing something practical. I'm yeah, well, there I am too. Right. Because I think there's something the martial artist knows about reality, right? That the physiologist doesn't, in the same way that the person repairing motorcycles and driving motorcycles knows something about reality that the physicist doesn't. Yeah.
Yeah. So one of the big areas that this tends to get turned in, poetic knowledge stuff specifically, people who put it that way, will be in terms of education. So schools, teachers, curricula, pedagogy, things like that. So the integrated humanities program, what they were really concerned with, they were teaching students in, say, the 1960s, late 60s, and they started to feel concerned that students couldn't get all they wanted them to out of a liberal arts curriculum, out of the text, because they were bringing a paucity of real world experience into college.
Amen.
And so, Jim, you will probably, I think, agree with this. It is always interesting to have in your classroom if somebody, comes to college at 18, 19, cool, we'll work with that. But if somebody has been a policeman or in the military or some other field and they're giving comments, you say something about philosophy and they give a comment from that, it always has this depth to it.
My two older boys either have been or are going to serve the Marine Corps before they go to college, right? Right. Yes. So my experience with veterans, with people who've been in trades and stuff, those are your best students.
Right, because they've gone through what Adler calls the invitation to the pain of learning, right?
Yeah.
And part of Adler's diagnosis is like we just have this cultural psychosis where we think that like childhood has to be completely pleasurable, all games, right?
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And it's like, and we just keep delaying maturity and delaying it and delaying it and delaying it. And one of the things that struck me, when I first got to college in my undergrad, was how slimly populated the classes were. And it essentially was me and the military people. Right.
Yeah.
And everybody else just like never showed up. And like, and like, what the hell is going on here? And like part of it was, I think I was actually sincerely motivated to learn, but I was also like dead ass broke. And like I also had like the skin in the game, like understanding like I'm paying for this. My ass is gonna be in the seat. Right.
The GI Bill guys, like they're like, we bought this, man. We're going to class. Right. Yeah.
And that carried through for, even in my senior year, you still saw people just skipping class. But the military guys and gals, they were always there, right? Because they'd been through the invitation of the pain to learn.
Yeah.
Right.
So, okay, so I don't know if you saw any of the early episodes, but Pat and I recently had talked about how I reread The Republic for the first time in years and years. I mean, it's probably been like 15 years since I read The Republic cover to cover, right? And one of the things that really struck me is how Plato would not at all have approved of how we do liberal education right now, right? Like one, he says, absolutely, you should never force somebody to study music, right? Like that's basically liberal arts, right? Should not force them because it's going to make them think it's all BS and they're going to become sophists in the long run, right? So this idea that you're going to take everybody who can muster a student loan and drag them through a liberal arts curriculum, Plato would have said it was insanity and it's going to ruin the polity, right? He has Socrates casually refer to his students as his 30-year-olds, right? Because the idea that you would try to teach any of this to somebody before their 30th birthday would be pretty absurd, right? In their 20s, they should be in the military because they're too, hormonal to do anything but fight and, something else with an F, right? Okay. You know what I mean? And so like, you can just get a sense like the founder of our liberal arts tradition for many of us, Plato, right, would look at what we're doing and say, that's absurd. You're getting it wrong. In fact, you're doing grave damage, right?
Wow.
To this. Yeah. There's an existential crisis for you, Casey. So.
Yeah. So at the Integrated Humanities program, they said, okay, we need more of a holistic community that these students are going to belong to, and they're going to do other activities that are going to shape them in ways that help them to ultimately benefit from the classroom experience as well. And the classroom experience might be a bit different too. But anyway, so they were like, we're going to do horsemanship and horseback riding. We're going to practice stargazing. We're going to practice ballroom dancing. There's a lot of dancing and music as lost arts that comes up in this tradition. And visiting the elderly is something I remember them talking about. So they were trying to, if you will, have sort of like extracurricular activities that they thought would fill in the missing background.
I've often thought about, Wellington's claim that Waterloo was won on the playing fields of Eton, right? So, that would have been like the high school, basically all those, that whole generation of officers went to, right? And so what did they do? They played rugby, which think of like what 19th century rugby looked like. That was probably a rough endeavor, right? But then also like they were reading their classics in the Greek too, right? I mean, like these were people who were prepared to do something really great, but across the board, physically, mentally, and these were all seen as co-equal parts of the education, right?
Yeah.
And now, essentially, our education system is aimed at disembodied subjects, right? It's aimed at disembodied subjects that somehow we can just say, okay, we can leave aside any kind of physical contact with reality and just teach this disembodied mind calculus and what have you. Well, guess what? No wonder it doesn't work, right? Because we're not disembodied. Yeah.
There's a section in the book Poetic Knowledge about someone who has difficulty learning math, but he spends time, when he's younger, he spends time on a farm and interacting with these objects and getting a sense of the physics of them helps him to understand geometry and other things in math on the basis of that sort of a poetic encounter with the rough and ready things themselves. Yeah.
So let me ask this question to the two of you. I asked it to Brian on the previous podcast I did. We'll start with you, Jim, then we'll go to you, Casey. Jim, you're appointed the czar of education, right? Mm-hmm. And you have full coercive power, right? Yeah. Liking this already. Yeah. What does it look like? Right?
It's coming in. Let's do it. Yeah.
What does it look like? Soup to nuts for you?
It is. I mean, wow. I mean, like you're basically asking, like, what would the Republic look like, right?
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's kind of a more restricted question to what you asked Mike Behe in our conversation. If he was,
it'd be deeply decentralized. Okay, right. So almost
a lot of subsidy for homeschooling.
Yeah, a lot of subsidy for homeschooling. Okay, because it would return. Okay, so we homeschool our kids to 8th grade and then we send them to high school. Mm-hmm. Okay, and the reason we do that is we want them to have a childhood, right? So, like right now, my kids are homeschooled. They are done with their work by late morning, right? And then they are literally in the yard catching snakes and climbing ropes, and they have jobs and all these things. Okay, so we would decentralize things so that, because like what centralization does is it levels, so then we have to spend time getting everybody in the same place on time, all that. So it becomes massively inefficient. So you spend a great deal of time in schools just getting people lined up to do the thing. And anyone who's done a homeschool curriculum will realize, like, you can get this done in a lot less time, right? And for us, that's the virtue of homeschooling, right? And I think you have a similar view about it too, Pat, right? And so then and it lets our kids then have an encounter with a tactile, unmanaged reality. Okay, so that would be big. So one would be decentralized, whether it be homeschooling or what have you, into very small groups that can take care of things. I hate to use the word efficiently, but much more efficiently, so that the children's time is just opened up to other activities where they're not being treated like disembodied subjects, where they're very much embodied subjects, right? Secondly, there would be martial arts involved. They would all learn how to fight. They would learn how to wrestle or fight in some way. Okay, just because I think it's
gymnastics.
Gymnastics, right?
Because that's it's a form of cleansing for Plato.
And what he meant by gymnastics was learn how to fight, right? And just because it's a primal human thing, we need to express this. It's a practical skill. It's embodied. So it would be decentralized, and there would be martial arts involved in a big way.
Yeah, could I just throw in there? I mean, Pat, as a fitness guy, and pretty, you're younger than us. How much of a waste of time is PE class, given how much time you have these people to teach them about physical education?
Yeah, I mean, to ask the question is to answer, right? Everybody knows how much of a waste of time PE class is, who's been through it, I guess, in the past 20 to 30 years, right? I mean, I was a product of that, right? And I grew up very overweight, out of shape. I didn't get anything out of PE class. And in fact, I could pass a lot of the standards in PE class, even though I was a slob, right? Like I could do their pathetic little sit-up test, right? Like that just wasn't like any sort of reasonable, well-formed type of assessment by any means. So I mean, it's deeply unfortunate. But I think part of it, I don't know what were you two both products of the public education system as well? Or
I mean, I went to Catholic schools.
Okay, I'm public school. So I went through in the 90s and early 2000s, whatever. So I don't know how much things have changed, but my understanding is that the standards kept getting lower and lower and lower. So by the time I went through, it's like a basic sit-up thing, right? And what else did we have to do? I'm trying to think back to this was in Michigan. So it might be different state by state. So we had to do sit-ups, which is just phenomenally pointless in many respects in terms of
in many ways. Yeah.
Right. And then we would just play games, right? We just like, it's fine, and games are fine, right? But if we're talking about like physical education, it wasn't much of an education, to be sure, right?
Mm-hmm. And
so
you know, it's so much of
the entire school experience is someone watching you for a certain amount of time during the day.
Yeah.
So your parents can work.
And like, not only that, but if I can rail a little bit, I mean, like, part of the reason I was, I guess, so fat was because I could go to the school cafeteria and use the money my parents deposited in my account to get like 3 Choco Tacos for lunch.
Exactly.
And then go sit out on the bench at recess.
Yeah. Well, you know, like, you know, Pat and I will both tell you, your 40-minute PE class 3 times a week is not going to keep you from getting fat.
Right.
Right. And it's a whole lifestyle. Right. And I think one of the things too, it's unfortunate for young people. And my kids are all involved in sports, like really heavily. Right. But I think we've too closely tied, fitness for kids to organized sport. Right. I mean, just the idea that, I mean, like, it's like they have to be transported to a soccer league for them to get exercise rather than just turning them loose, right? Into the wild where they have to figure something out, right? You know what I mean? And that's one reason why I like martial art better, because it's taught in a way that this isn't just planned activity. This is something you need to do to be like an independent human being, is to be able to defend yourself, right? Do you see what I mean? But in general, I think like it was the kids were. I mean, this is my unverified like social scientific claim of the day. I get at least one every day, right? The kids in the 50s weren't in great shape because of the rigorous PE they had. They could handle rigorous PE because they were going home and swimming in open water, right? And climbing trees and getting in fights, right? Okay. That's why they could handle the rigorous PE classes that they had back then, right? It wasn't the PE. That was the symptom, not the cause, right? The cause was that they lived like the kind of animal we really are. Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And one thing connected with fitness, obviously, is nutrition. So if you're going to be educating someone for 12 years, they should know how to cook by the end of the 12th year. Yeah. You should know how to cook good food. You should know how to do some things with a car, and you should know how to fix some things in a house. And like you mentioned with the disembodied minds thing, Jim, it's just completely ignored. It's just job prep, basically.
I saw a great internet meme once where some guy, it was like, they got me to get like a C+ in pre-calc, but I can't do my taxes, right? I'm like, there you go, right? I mean, like what has the education system, like even like a college track, you know, like some kid gets pushed through pre-calc, right? But he can't do his taxes. That person's not ready for reality, right?
Yeah. I mean, in terms of in-class learning and education, by the way, I'll just put in another plug for John Senior's Good Books. People can look that up online, the Good Books, which is hundreds and hundreds.
Not quite the great books, but
not quite the great books. They are more like good fiction, often adventure tales that he thinks are great for young people to read. And you find all like age 7, this, age 8, that, and so on. So that could be part of the reading regimen. But in class at the Integrated Humanities program, they were big in having 2 or 3 professors in the classroom.
Yes.
Discussing the day's reading amongst themselves, a conversation that could go in any direction. It's not a perfect lesson plan. That wasn't quite how they structured it. There was a day's reading, but they didn't have a checklist of points they needed to get through. And then the students were primarily listening to this conversation going on between the professors.
Yeah.
Now,
just let the grown-ups talk, right? And you'll learn something, right?
Yeah,
it's like when
there is that.
It's like at a dinner party with your parents' friends when you were a kid, right? You learned so much of that sort of thing, right?
Yeah, I changed the way I taught because of going over this material. Of course, I cannot bring in a second professor, at my whim. But I thought, well, for example, they're big into when you're learning Latin, don't use a textbook. John Senior taught Latin. You just teach it conversationally. That's tough, but that was his approach. I'm not saying I agree with every single absolute thing about this. By the way, Pat, you recently lost electricity recently.
Right.
He thought that schools should have no electricity, no running water. He wanted you going out to the outhouse, and he wanted you feeling heat on hot days, and
through and through.
Yeah,
right?
when are you feeling the elements? When are you not being shielded from these things?
When our kids were little, we would not turn the air conditioning off on until it was 90 degrees out. So they would go outside. And even when it was 90 degrees, even though I know this was inefficient, we wouldn't turn it on till noon. Okay, so like we wanted it to be pretty hot in the house, so they were uncomfortable, and they would go outside and play.
That's smart. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So what I used to teach in a very, I think, normal or standard style, whatever that looks like. Lecture, I'll field some questions, we got a day's reading that we're going to go over, all that sort of thing. But I started to think, what does it mean for students to encounter philosophy poetically? Because he opposes textbooks in the realm of Latin, in the realm of biology. He wants them out in nature, right? Learning about things directly. In history, he doesn't really want any textbooks. He wants them maybe reading Herodotus and reading firsthand accounts of people who were there and visiting sites and so on, that sort of thing. But I thought, well, in philosophy, though, we're all about the text. So what am I going to do? So all I did was I changed it to more of a small group discussion style format, because I wanted them to have kind of a forced inauguration into Socratic dialogues, and for people who had never experienced that before, to give them a taste of that, maybe develop the habit, and then maybe it carries outside of the classroom, so they're more likely to engage in that outside of the class. So that's been one of the biggest effects.
At least you don't have to talk to them that much, so that's a plus, right? I mean,
I just bounce around, I listen in. If they're doing good, I move on to the next group. But yeah,
man, if I could just leave the room while they do that, that'd be awesome.
Right. right.
Yeah, come to a podcast.
Come to a podcast.
I insert myself where it's necessary, but I do give them more free reign, and I think they enjoy that.
Yeah,
that's nice.
I give them discussion questions as a guide. But yeah, Jim, I don't know I was curious if you had any thoughts in light of all this material in terms of like college classroom pedagogy in the humanities or anything like that.
I mean, gosh, I don't know. I mean, I think increasingly, I just think we shouldn't be doing it, right? But I mean, because I've tried everything, right? So I'm pretty grouchy, curmudgeon old teacher now, right? I'll say this though is. I agree with you that okay, so for instance, I'm really struck by the fact we spent so much time teaching people how to like write a research paper, right? And you're gonna like make this kid do this 10-page research paper, and man, it better be perfect Chicago manual style, right? And it better have all these like features on it. And the last research paper that kid is gonna write in a philosophy class, unless it's that one kid you get every 5 years that wants to be you when he or she grows up, right? The last philosophy paper that kid's going to write is that paper, right? So like, what are we doing? What are we doing wasting time on that sort of thing, right? I think that's a really silly thing to spend our time on. And I've really tried to spend less time on that sort of thing, right? What I do spend my time on, I'm not sure anymore because I'm pretty frustrated with the classroom, right? But I do know that like this idea of I'm teaching to be like professional scholars, that's silly. Like, I mean, I have 120 students this semester, one or two of them maybe have the slightest interest in doing that, right?
Yeah, I'm in a similar boat where I teach at a seminary, so all the students are aiming to become priests, but they have to get this undergrad philosophy degree in order to do that. And so I'm getting people who are they're all philosophy majors, but not exactly by choice. And so this kind of experimentation I've done with the conversational method and the discussion groups is kind of me trying to work around that aspect.
Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah, I've thought about the small group thing. Part of it though is like whenever I go to a meeting and they tell me there's small groups, I leave, right? So I think it's like my own resentment for that kind of thing, which maybe I'm just projecting on the students. Well,
it's really like what we're doing right now. I would be fine with my students doing that. I give them a text to read. I think reading is obviously an essential philosophical activity, so they do that, but it's guided a bit by a reading, and I give them a list of questions because I think if you give all the leeway in the world, it does go off the rails a bit, but
I have a lot of text read aloud in the classroom now. Like I don't read it. I think the number one way to lose your students is to read aloud to them, right? Never do that, right? But I'll have, so let's say, I made a reading assignment of like 15 pages of which no one will read, but I'll pick 4 or 5 paragraphs out of that thing And then basically we'll spend the class reading those aloud and it kind of like going over it line by line, right? I think that's and you might essentially be like, in my experience, you're teaching them how to read basically right there, right?
Okay. Yeah. I mean, I do love a great lecture as a thing of beauty. And one of my favorite grad school classes was philosophy of science. And that guy, just every class, here's a new thinker. Here he is in summary laid out on the chalkboard. And I was trying to wrap my head around the field though. And so I was very interested in that type of thing.
Yeah, I mean, you, unlike our students, cared about what you were learning, right? I mean, and so that's the problem. Is the vast majority. I mean, like literally, like 95% of the students I encounter just don't care, right? They're being made to do this to fill a requirement, right? And so that's
hold on. One thing, let me chime in here, and I appreciate you guys carrying this conversation. Dad's a little tired today. Kids enough to see great.
Yeah.
But I agree that normally that is a cause for great sadness, right? You want people to be excited about this stuff. Of course you do. However, one thing that I guess gave me a little bit of hope is I think back to, Jim, I told you this, Casey, I don't know if I told you this. My listeners are probably getting sick of hearing it. But my first ethics professor, undergrad, was a strong form moral relativist. Yeah. I mean, like just a pure instrument of indoctrination. Right. Just like the worst of the worst. Right. Yeah. That like exactly what you do never would want to send your kids to. And so I would just, of course, argue with the professor all the time. I'm like, I had not even had my own commitments worked out at the time, but I was like quite confident that this was just a geyser of nonsense that was being spewed in front of the class all the time. Now, I often got frustrated, but then I would look around and realize nobody's paying attention to this lady.
Yeah.
Nobody cares a word about what this woman is saying.
Yeah.
So like in that sense, like that was actually a source of optimism for me. Like if a lot of higher education are just these awful indoctrination facilities, which many of them are.
Yeah.
It's like two bads that almost cancel out. You see what
I'm
saying?
No. Yeah. That's just it. So I'll see this in like the internal politics of my own institution, where people people who they're all worried about people who have a different ideological take indoctrinating the students, right? And whenever someone comes to me about that, I'm like, do you think they pay attention to what you say? Right? No. Well, do you think they pay attention to what the other guy says? No. Right? I mean, I don't think they're even effective ideologically. I think it's exactly what Plato was worried about. Is they're coming away because they don't really want to do this, just thinking liberal arts is BS, right? I think what we're creating in universities is not. I mean, I know we like see like the really like visible Antifa types, right? But I think like the vast majority people coming out of universities, whatever the type of university now, are not ideologically committed. They're intellectually indifferent, right? Is what the problem is.
Yeah, many of them are, but at the same time, the ones that are invested do pop out.
Yeah.
On that side of on the far side of fantastic ideologies, unfortunately, right? Yeah. But yeah, so it was like that was just kind of my optimistic spin, as optimistic as I could make it on some of these things, anyways.
Yeah. Well, this is one thing that got the integrated humanities program into trouble. They were sort of housed within the University of Kansas, but they started to raise eyebrows because it started to seem to other people like a cult-like environment or something taking shape on the campus. And they said, there's too much indoctrination into the true, good, and beautiful. That was their sort of explicit motto happening here. And they sort of owned it. So, I mean, let me read this quote to you guys from Dennis Quinn, was one of the teachers there. He said, "To be honest with yourself and your students, you must teach what you can see with your intellect to be true, and you must get the students to see that truth with their intellects."
Yeah.
What we often hear is something like, "It's my job to teach you how to think, not what to think." And those would be sort of contrasting, pedagogical approaches, where I'm more offering you a menu, and I try to do it as clearly as I can, and you select what speaks to you from that menu, as opposed to a narrower sort of vision that we have that we are intentionally trying to hand on to the students almost persuasively.
Yeah.
That was, I mean, to be honest, I think I have been a little more like, I want to present you these ideas as clearly as I can, and I think they will speak for themselves. And I do think they had that aspect. I mean, you read all I've read about the IHP, they were not that pushy, right? With the material that they were going over or anything like that. They thought that it would kind of speak for itself. So that I'm fine with. We all have to make choices about what we're going to teach, and the choice that you make to teach something is kind of a statement in itself.
Yep.
But I think it should speak for itself from there. Yeah.
Yeah.
You don't need to be too heavy-handed with it.
So I know I said we would take some questions from the audience here, but is there anything else? And we'll definitely do that before we say goodbye. But Casey, is there anything else from our previous conversations that you wanted to build upon, or
I guess I would just mention
that,
Senior is interested in us acquiring poetic knowledge, and he thinks we tend to do that in a certain environment. A school can be crafted to hand on scientific knowledge to you, where it gets you to memorize, teach to the test, and you memorize all the answers that the state needs you to know for this test that everybody's taking at the end of the year and that sort of thing, right? That would be a scientific approach. It can happen in a school. It can happen in a family setting, which John Senior writes a lot about, and it can happen at the broader cultural level. I mean, in a certain sense, you learn to have certain beliefs and eating habits by growing up in the average American town dotted with fast food restaurants and things like that. He thinks there's a kind of education that happens through you being surrounded with this architecture, these businesses, clothing. He goes into all kinds of nitty-gritty details that subliminally have an effect on your outlook and that sort of thing. So what he was interested in, his main books are The Death of Christian Culture and The Restoration of Christian Culture. And the word culture is really key to what he's interested in. So, but we mentioned Terrence Malick making films rather than writing treatises. That would be a poetic move.
Right.
Rather than a scientific move. Now, I mean, you see how much of an uphill battle it is for Terrence Malick to get any kind of wide scale sort of audience.
It's interesting though, the studios keep giving him money that they don't recoup on those films.
Okay.
Right? I don't know.
Someone's convinced.
Yeah.
I'm curious what you guys think about cultural change as such, change at the level of culture. So, for example, in my lifetime, in Jim, in your lifetime, and I guess in yours as well, Pat, there's been a sea change in our attitude towards smoking. Mm-hmm. You say there's been a cultural change on that, where we went to thinking, I guess even when I was a kid, we thought it was harmful, but it became a almost taboo thing to engage in, especially to take up anew when you're young and that sort of thing. And I remember when I was a kid, there being vending machines that would give you cigarette packs if you put a couple quarters in or whatever. So A, there were a couple quarters, and B, you could get them as a kid from the vending machine.
You had that thing, that knob you pulled, right?
Yes, it was one of those heavy duty machines.
I'm told.
Yeah, from the 50s or 60s, those heavy duty metal machines that you would never see anymore. So
my dad owned a string of failed bars, and I remember those vending machines in there. So,
Right. So, I was reading like last year that more people are obese in America than ever before. And so this is a feature of our culture. And similar to smoking, what does it take to turn that ship around? I mean, with smoking, you had all kinds of research and scientific studies that maybe help.
We were willing to smoke shame people, right?
Right. Yeah.
We won't do that with obesity. Yeah.
Right. And not only that, but we already have all the evidence we need against obesity. But now we have all the sophistry right out there of this sort of healthy at any size movement, which is sophistry, right?
And so I'm not going to say this is like a conscious conspiracy, right? Okay, but I do think economic incentives work subconsciously, right? Okay, we have a healthcare system that is like very invested in people not being healthy, right? Okay, like an obese person who we're going to like keep alive, right? For into their 70s and 80s. That's probably millions of dollars per individual that the healthcare industry is going to make off of that, right? So it would seem that like there's like a really weird economic incentive here, right, to want to treat but not cure something like obesity, because no one makes any money out of you not eating something, right? Lots of people make money out of you eating stuff and then taking the diabetes medicine just like let you keep eating bad stuff, right, and stay alive, right? So I think and maybe, I don't know if that was the case with smoking or not, but it seems like the economic incentives are really against anybody doing anything about obesity.
Right. Yeah. So I'll just add a couple. The whole idea of shame is interesting, right? Like, I think we all agree that at some level you should feel shame over some actions, right? Unless you're like a hardcore nihilist or something.
Yeah.
And then if you don't want to just I guess legislate everything, it seems like shame itself has an important societal role to play to keep certain behaviors in check, right?
Yeah.
And I think it does that for smoking to a large extent. Now, we also now have laws, on the books. I forget specifically what they are, but you can't smoke I remember growing up that there was still smoking in restaurants and stuff. I don't know if that's actually.
I remember when you could smoke in the hotel lobby, right?
Right, but even now, like, I'm willing to bet if they took the laws off the books, if there are laws on the books for not smoking restaurants, like, most people would not do it because they would be shamed, right? They would be
rude. It'd be rude.
It would be rude. It'd be seen as rude. And same thing is, like, there was always, I just go back to abuse does not negate proper use. Yes, there is some threshold that shouldn't be crossed of how you treat somebody who is a human and with dignity, right? Absolutely. However, right, there was a certain shame that attached to my being overweight that really motivated me.
Yeah,
really motivated me to change my life for the better. And in fact, my doctor, the doctor that actually intervened with me, and this was around the 7th or 8th grade, right? By today's standards, she would probably be called a fat shamer, right? Because she said to me, she's like, Pat, look, the way you're living right now, you're healthy right now, right? So, like, that's what the healthy at any size people focus on, like just taking a snapshot in time, ignoring all the massive amounts of empirical research of how being obese dramatically increases all your risk for virtually everything: cancer, diabetes, stroke, you name it, right?
But getting chased down by a bear.
Right. Yeah. So in the 8th grade, even though I was overweight, I would, run my blood panels. I was still, healthy. Right. But my doctor, being a smart woman, said, look, if you continue on like this, you might have a heart attack before you're 50. Right.
Yep.
And she's like, you need to seriously start, thinking about exercising, eating better. So there was an element of shame to that. Now, she wasn't like, you're just a fat, pathetic loser who's never going to amount to anything. And, stuff like that, right? So obviously there's nuance to these types of things, but she was willing to have. This is what, like, I forget her name, but she's obviously stuck with me in a very positive light now. She made me feel uncomfortable at the time, but she was willing to do what was not the easy thing, but the right thing in that situation, right? People aren't willing to do that anymore, especially now that our culture has taken this ridiculous turn. With what is called like fat acceptance or fat. It's beyond fat acceptance now. It's like fat affirmation, right?
Yeah, or body positive.
Body positive, and like it's one of those things that they roll. This is how a lot of cultural moves seem to be made. They roll a couple of like obvious truisms in with a whole bunch of nonsense. Yeah, right.
And I think this is a great case of where supposedly like progressively minded people are being co-opted by the economic incentives of like really disgusting unbridled capitalism, right? Because like do you see what I mean? Because like it's really good for a lot of business that people remain very fat, right? And that they continue to eat garbage and they continue to drink alcohol at the level they do and all this stuff. Do you see what I mean? And I think it's one of those great ironies where the surface story sounds like very accepting and progressive, but deep down, this is like really nasty market stuff. That's
you're making Marx roll all over in his.
But no, I mean he's right on that one. Right?
Look, I'm very far from a Marxist, but Marx has many great critiques. He does. Like you don't just want to just wave that guy away. A lot of stuff he said was perfectly legitimate, right?
I mean, a good cui bono argument has a place, right?
Right.
Yeah, Nietzsche was so worried. He was so worried that what modernity will spawn would be people who are not capable of self-contempt, right? Because he thought as soon as you're not capable of self-contempt, that humanity is not going to attempt to like become something greater than whatever it shows up as, right? And that's what he means by nihilism, is like these people who they're without aspiration because they are not capable of having contempt for their current situation, right? And that's why like Nietzsche has this like grudging respect for Christianity, because like it makes you like have contempt for your current state, right? He has a different vision of what you should be contemptuous about, but he still thinks like that was something to move you, right? And so as soon as now is like, we're not capable of self-contempt, right? Like, because that would, the idea that you should have a shame about anything, it's gone, which there goes human motivation, right? Yeah.
Yeah. Smoking may have been an easier case because there's secondhand smoke where it's not as clear that you eating a big cheeseburger makes me gain weight. And then smoking had this lung disease. Of course, there are other things attached, but it had like this big boogeyman sort of that was going to greet you at the end or in your 50s or something like that. And maybe there's like just a more dispersed set of bad consequences from overeating.
Yeah, well, I mean, like obesity has lots of externalities, though.
Yeah,
it does. It might not be like as immediately obvious or direct as secondhand smoke, but tons of externalities, I would argue. So I still think a good argument from externalities still could be made, there.
Yeah, no, and I wonder if we might accumulate. I mean, you think about the age of people who are 60 now and who will be 60 in 10 years and how eating habits have changed since like the 1970s and TV dinners and all sorts of other things that we know about. And just maybe as that group ages into old age and we see problems explode, maybe that's the sort of knock upside the head that would lead to a cultural change. I think about that. I also think about it in terms of music, but we don't need to go back to that. Just what would it even look like for the culture to change around this practice or this topic?
I don't know.
Implosion. I don't know. I tend to not be horribly optimistic, unfortunately. Good stuff. I mean, I'm glad we brought this up because I think this is a topic that we can explore in an entire conversation all of its own. I mean, this whole fat affirmation thing just annoys me to no end, and it's gaining a lot of traction. I think it's pernicious on many different levels. But but that's the thing. It's so funny because it condemns the thing it uses to promote itself. It condemns shaming, but then shames anybody who criticizes it. Right?
No, and Pat, you know my story on this, and if anyone wants to see the before picture of me on my website, like that was when I was 30, right? And imagine you project that forward 17 more years of weight gain, right? I'm probably by that point, like by the time I'm 47, I'm probably like 400 pounds by then, right?
You're dead by COVID.
Yeah, and then that means last October I would have at least been like on a vent when I got COVID, right? And we know, like my understanding, 78% the cases turn up in hospitals. There's a comorbidity with obesity. Now there could be some third thing in there or something. I get right, but but no one wants to talk about that, right? And because we're too worried about shaming people and blaming victims and stuff like that. But here's the deal, man. If I hadn't taken that action back 17 years ago, right, I probably snuffed it last fall.
Right.
Period.
Well, I'm glad you
Period.
did.
Full stop. Yeah.
I'm glad you're still with us.
Yep. Thank you. Thank you.
All right. Let's take a few questions.
Thank you, Pavel. Man.
We won't be able to take them all. Let me just skim here real quick. Brandon, would this mean that it's either something can't be neither conditioned nor unconditioned? Those are logical contraries. So the way I formulate my cosmological argument, the causal principle I use compatible with all classical quantum systems of causality. I'll do a future episode on that. Let's move here to John Erickson. And I also see that ND Irish is recommending Rob Kuhn's work on Aristotelian metaphysics and quantum mechanics, which I would highly commend as well. Actually, Neo-Aristotelian perspectives on modern science is a must read if you're interested in that sort of thing.
I would say so, yeah.
And Kuhn's is an editor on that, so good recommendation. All right, here's a question. John Erickson says, what is your stance, all of us, I suppose, on the relation between ethics and aesthetics? Is there an inextricable link between these axiological categories? Literary figures like Lewis and Tolkien. I don't know if this got cut off or not, but I think we have enough to work with here, gentlemen. So what are your thoughts?
I'm with Kant. I think the beautiful is the symbol of the good, right? So I think they are inextricably linked, right? And I think what makes the good tangible to us, what models it for us is what we encounter in nature aesthetically and what we encounter in art aesthetically. Yeah.
Casey?
Yeah, of course. I mean, there's the doctrine of the transcendentals coming out of medieval metaphysics, where Anything with being is also one, and true and good. And then there's a debate about whether beauty should be included in the list of transcendentals, but it's all one diamond seen from different angles or perspectives, right? And so if the good and the beautiful, they could just be two aspects of the same thing. I mean, I do think there's got to be a truth in which, a good action that you witness is a beautiful thing.
Right.
Yep. And I also think just, from approaching ethics through the virtues is you are not going to be a person of like, the highest moral virtue who is also a person of impeccably bad taste. Right. And I don't think you're going to become a person of impeccably good taste and be utterly without moral virtue. Right.
Right. And this guy brought up Lewis. Lewis talks about this. He says that because I don't enjoy the company of young children, which apparently he didn't.
Yeah, I know.
He says this is a moral flaw of mine. He noted that, right? Yeah. There was something like I should see beauty in this because it is a beautiful thing, but for some reason, I'm not picking that up. Yep. And that's a problem with me.
Yep. I was absolutely the same way till I had kids, man. I couldn't stand kids. Like I would go to a restaurant and they would ask me smoking or not. I'd say I don't care, just no kids, right?
Look, part of it might be because kids aren't so well behaved. Right?
I know, no, that's what I came to realize is I love well behaved kids, right? But other people's bad kids, I have no time for.
You enjoy good kids.
I enjoy good kids. Yeah. I worry though I'm going to be like a really grouchy grandfather. Like, get out of my chair.
All right. Yeah. Let's take how you guys on time? You got a couple more minutes?
Yeah, I got comments. Yep.
I'm fine.
All right. Awesome. This is fun. Totally fun conversation. All right. Parisa asks, I don't know if you guys want to chime in on this. Parisa asks, what's the relationship between logical and metaphysical modality? Parisa, I linked an excellent article from philosopher Bill Vallicella. Really good guy on this. So I would just go read that. He's got a nice sort of 2-page summary on exactly your question.
Pat will not be surprised to find that in my mature years now, I've become to be a bit of a modal skeptic, but
yeah, you and Gavin both.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, Gavin's with me. That's fine too. That's right.
But yeah, so Bill's article's linked in the comments. I would be in line. I would highly recommend Bill, and he's got a great blog too. Vallicella's. It's sort of he muses about all different things.
That is a full-grown man. You know what I mean?
Oh yeah, there's no doubt about that.
Yeah.
Irish says, have you heard of John Vervaeke? He works in this area from a psychological neuroscience, but I think he's talking about poetic knowledge. I have not heard of him. I don't know if either of you two have.
Hit us with some links on that. I'd like to see that, Irish.
Yeah, put them in. Let's check it out. Nicholas says, Pat, how did you deal with this type of moral relativism in the setting of a university?
Partied pretty hard, right?
Yeah, I think he's talking about the professor that I've
talked
about. Yeah. I mean, there were a couple of. I mean, first off, it's just. Let me clarify. From my understanding, I haven't seen any recent surveys, but my understanding is most ethicists are not relativists. Most are moral realists. Yep. But there's enough relativists out there, and apparently one of them is at Westchester University, right? And this was a very strong form of moral relativist, like the self-defeating kind, where the professor would say the very strong claims, like we ought not to praise, criticize, condemn, blame, right? So she's making these moral judgments about how we shouldn't make moral judgments, right? So it's a position that just ultimately is self-defeating and ties itself and not. So I don't think it was anything that took a lot of intellectual work to argue against. And in fact, I had this kind of, I say like somewhat famous exchange because Alex was actually with me at the time. This was years ago. And he was actually, me and Alex have been friends for a while. He was sitting because I had to go to class. And he was out visiting and he was sitting outside the classroom. He actually overheard part of the conversation when I was arguing with the professor. And I kind of had this sort of almost cartoonish exchange with the professor. Right, where I called her out for this. I'm like, well, like you're telling me I ought not to do something, but you're telling like I ought not to praise or blame or criticize or whatever. I'm like you don't see like any weird inconsistency here at all about this. And we kept going back and forth, and for a long time, and she was really digging her heels in. But of course, so was I, right? I mean, that's
Yeah.
You too.
But,
and then at one point,
your position was consistent with heel digging, right?
Right.
Whereas hers wasn't, right?
Right. And so, at some point I threw my hand because she's like, that's right. It is how it went. Right? She's like maybe you because she tried to change her language to make it seem like it wasn't so inconsistent. So then she's like, well, Pat, maybe it would be valuable to you to let other people chime in. I say, no, what's valuable to me is running my mouth. Right. That's my value system. Right. Yeah. She's like, well, maybe have you ever considered, I don't value considering other things. Right. I don't value, this is my values. Right. These are my values to me. Right. So no matter how she tried to go, I was pretty good at being annoying about showing the problems with it. And then at some point I just got tired. I threw my hands up look, Professor, I'm not trying to be a jerk. I'm really not. But I think this is seriously a problem. And I'm looking around the class at this point and I can tell the kids just don't care, right? And this is what I was talking about with you, Jim. They just here I am thinking I'm being noble and saving them from this horrible indoctrination. They're just let this end, right? Let us get out of this class.
Yeah, we thought maybe we could get out early today, and now you're arguing.
And now Pat's running his mouth, and the professor's digging in, right? So I'm sure they just hated both of us, right?
Yeah.
Now interestingly enough, I had some good conversations with this professor, after class, and she's very nice, very, very nice woman. And it's just one thing that struck me, and sorry to go on about this, is what I asked her, why, why this, right? This just seems so incoherent. She's like, well, it's just something. The line, this is just something I'm trying on. It was like a fashion wear or something like that. There was no deeper motivation behind it. It was just something they were trying on. So I don't have anything more to say about that, but if maybe you guys want to chime in.
I'm sympathetic to that notion of trying stuff on, but not what she said. So I mean, I think to really get something, you have to try to see the world through it. Right?
That's true. That's McIntyre.
Yeah. Right. And so a lot of what I do in my classroom is kind of hermeneutical exercises where I'm going to try to make you have to see the world as a Hegelian and see the world as a Kantian and see the world as a Aristotelian. And I, as Pat knows, I go through big phases too myself. Right. But I'm self-conscious that they're phases, right? And that I'm probably going to abandon them to the point that I'm not going to dig my heels in, especially with my students over it, right?
Right. This wasn't let's just entertain this for an intellectual exercise. This is what you students need to comply with.
Yeah,
and
exactly.
Here is the inclusionary mission statement that you got to sign your name to be a part of this class. Type of BS, right?
Yeah, and so I even said to a lot of my students last semester, I had this course I did on Kant's Third Critique and Heidegger, right? Where I said, hey, I'm having a Heidegger phase right now, and it's only rock and roll, but it's what I'm doing right now. And you people don't have to agree with me to do this, right? You just have to engage with this, right? I think that's a very healthy environment, right?
To be sure.
I think that's great. I think it's very authentic in a way, in a positive sense, to teach that way. And in a sense, it models real interest in philosophy on your part. You're I am reading. This is not the same stuff I taught 25 years ago.
It's not.
That is dusty, and it's just, I'm going to hand it on to you in whatever form. This is a little bit passionate for me right now.
Yeah, I'm still in live inquiry. I'm still in live inquiry myself. I'm unsettled. I think it's good for the kids. Yeah. Well, the ones that are paying attention, right? Yeah.
Right.
The other ones just need word searches. You can give them or something.
All right. Well, we started with movies. Let's end with movies. Here's a question from Parker. Fairly new here. Love the channel. Thanks, Parker. Have you guys seen Malik's new film, A Hidden Life? If so, any general thoughts? Maybe you guys already talked about it. I thought it was powerful. So
yeah, it's brilliant. I think it's a place to begin reviewing Malik. I also think it's Malik's own kind of criticism of Heidegger, right? I mean, there's I think he's pointing out Heidegger's own inconsistencies because of his Nazism, right? Because it's very clear, much of that film is inspired by the recommendation of poetic knowing from Being in Time, but then I think at the same time showing how bloody insistent that is with the kind of fascism that Heidegger himself went through, right? So I think you have like this very interesting, not necessarily self-criticism, but criticism of Malick's great philosophical influence by Malick in that film. Yeah, so it's a brilliant film. Yeah, it's also Malick's most like overtly Christian film too.
Yeah. Do you know the story of the movie, Pat?
No, I haven't seen it. I actually just started with Malick. I started with To the Wonder, which I know is like his, I guess, critically lowest film, but I actually quite enjoyed it.
Oh God, it's brilliant! It's brilliant.
Yeah. I actually even like Ben Affleck in there, and you know what? People rag on Affleck. I don't know anything really about him personally, but I tend to actually like the movies that Affleck is in. And I didn't think he was even the worst Batman. In fact, Batman vs. Superman is one of those movies that everybody else hates, but Pat Flynn actually quite enjoys.
That a boy.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, I think To the Wonder is brilliant. I think it is. And I think it's one of the best film statements of the Heideggerian critique of our technological way of life too. And showing its repercussions into our love relationships and even like life issues and stuff like that. Yeah, it's brilliant.
Yeah. The movie is about a man in Austria who is in a rural village, and he refuses to sign off on any paper that is an allegiance to Hitler.
Yeah.
And trying to force him to do that. I think after trying to make him fight or something, he won't. And he simply doggedly refuses over and over and over again. And they tell him, look, no one's going to know if you sign. Just sign. You have a wife and kids and so on and so forth. The movie opens with a quote from the novel Middlemarch about whether it's possible that in some sense, it's something like this, I'm paraphrasing, the world is in some sense sustained by hidden acts of goodness that nobody ever perceives.
Yeah.
And he stays true to his guns to the point of execution. He's a Catholic saint now, I believe.
Blessed. Yep.
Okay.
So it's based on a true story.
But here's the it's based on true story. Yeah. But here's the layers of irony in this. Okay. So like Heidegger's theory of truth is always the revealing of something, right? A hidden life, right? Like in the opening epilogue, right? So, like the real truths are actually hidden. So there's like this kind of like pushback against the Heideggerian theory of truth, right? But what is Malick doing in this film? He's revealing this life. It's not with the making of this film. It's not a hidden life anymore, right? So like I have been going around in that irony in my head for 18 months now over that film, right? Do you mean like what is this a rejection of the notion of truth that's revealing, or is it an affirmation of it, right? Because by the act of the film, that life is no longer hidden, right?
So
the three of us are talking about this man, we'd have never talked about it before if that film hadn't been made.
So instead of watching RoboCop for the 47th time tonight, maybe I should watch it.
Two things can be true, Pat. Two things.
Yeah, I got time for both.
Come on, it's the weekend, bro.
And the character, I mean, who's a real person, he was convinced that there was a reason to do a good thing. He never knew a movie would be made about it. He never knew anyone would know about it.
Right.
And yet to him it was important to do.
Yeah, awesome.
But I just love this film about hiddenness that is bringing the hiddenness into unconcealment.
That is revealing. Yeah.
It is revealing. Yeah. I mean, and so by the way, if you can begin to look at your life with this kind of aesthetic richness, the moral quality of your life is going to go up too.
It's going to go way up.
Yeah.
So this isn't one that's going to make you call your psychotherapist right away afterwards. It might actually be psychotherapy.
Yeah. Well,
I don't know.
There's some hard moments, but yeah, it's not like, I mean, think of the name of the film is I'm thinking of ending things, right? So, yeah.
That's the other film. That's the other film.
Yeah.
The Hidden Life is Malick. Yeah,
Hidden Life is much more uplifting.
Awesome, good stuff. Awesome, fascinating conversation. Just finishing thoughts. Anyone, and Casey, anything else you're working on, or just want to mention before we go?
I'm not working on anything except class prep right now, which starts next week, and I'm looking forward to getting back in there. But just one thought that I have been having in relation to a lot of this material. We talked about culture a bit. Of course, Aristotle says that when you develop a virtue, it tends to produce good actions. And I think we often consider those like discrete acts. Like if you develop generosity, you will drop money in the collection plate or whatever the discrete action might be. But I think there's another dimension to that, which is virtue will tend to produce a positive effect in terms of one's culture, even if it's just your family, your classroom, your organization, wherever especially you have some authority. you'll tend to produce structures that bring people into the same virtues that you have. And that we could talk more about that. That would take all kinds of different shapes, but this emphasis on culture, I'm getting more and more into as I age in my philosophical career, and I made that connection with Aristotle.
That's great. That could set us up for part 4 then. Which I would very much welcome.
The only lasting contribution I will make is these 6 practitioners of Western culture that I'm going to unleash on the world, right? You know,
that's it. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So that I'm working on that. That's what I'm working on. I guess I'm working on course prep, which depresses me, but I have to do it. So
we'll talk for a minute after, Jim. I'll try to encourage you.
Yeah. All right, we're going backstage to the after party, and sorry guys, we're gonna have to cut it here for the rest of you. But
cool.
Always a fun.
That was fun, Casey. Yeah.
Philosophy Friday Jam session. So thanks for tuning in, everybody. Please like, share, leave your comments below, and we'll catch you on the next episode.